Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I am extra excited today because I have the great pleasure of the company of Mark Atwood. Hello, Mark.
How's it going?
Very well. And as I said, I'm extra excited. We have a number of people in common, so it's about time that we bumped into each other, I think.
That's happening a lot. People are, hooking up.
I think so. I think that there is a beautiful network of light that's emerging, and there's more nodes in it all the time. So it's wonderful. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because you have this amazing health club, so to speak, that you've started. And we could read it as Live 5D Health or Live 5D Health. And I think both are so powerful, whichever way we say it. How do you say it? And what do you feel is the reason why you chose this wonderful name?
Well, we call it Live 5D Health because it's a manifesting statement of intent, and it's what was the question? How do we call it?
Yes, I asked you that,
Oh,
and
how
I
we got the name?
yeah,
So the way it depends how far back you go because it's all kind of. I mean, I often joke about the fact that I think it's hilarious that I own a healing center because I never thought I would. It never crossed my mind years ago, but my own health journey has it all kind of makes sense now, and because I've nearly died a few times and had really serious health issues that taught me that you can't trust the healthcare system, and then forced me to take extreme measures that included, week-long fasts and discovery. I mean, for example, I was talking about this morning actually, because the hawthorn berries are out here in Ireland en masse at the moment. And we were talking about these yesterday, saying, oh my God, so many hawthorn berries. And the hawthorn berry saved my life 25 years ago because it's the best thing you can take for your heart. And I had an arterial fibrillation after a suspected heart attack. And once that put me on a path, and that path led to lots of different things. Just digging deep into things like the C word, not the other C word, the C word that is trademarked by the bad guys. There was an act against it in 1937 where you can't discuss. And I'm going to be careful with words because I know you're on YouTube. You can't discuss certain things around that particular illness because they trademarked it. That's why you can't use it. So, and I've watched so many relatives die of that, and it led to anyway. I moved to the west of Ireland about 7 or 8 years ago, and total coincidence. And I don't believe in coincidences, but a guy moved in 2 doors down from me, like within a couple of months of me moving in, and he came from Dublin. And he had a young family. His name was Gary Keeley. And me and him got talking because we had crypto in common, right? Because we're in the west of Ireland, and I meet a guy who's a crypto trader, and I go like, wow, because everybody here is, farmers and stuff, and there's not a lot of crypto going on here. And we just hit it off, and he was obviously deeply spiritual and on his own path, and he's extremely healthy. Unlike me, at the time I met him, I was going through a divorce and I was living in the pub. So, and I was discovering how depressed all the men of the world are by being in the pub every night for about a year. But we got chatting before COVID, and we were talking about setting up healing centers in conversation. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and then I found myself being called to interview a lot of people about different things to do with health. And I was discovering things like structured living water. And I already knew about alkaline diets. I'd already been through every diet you could possibly imagine, trying to get healthy myself. But at the same time, under demonic attack, as I now realize, I was fighting an uphill battle personally which I think I'm over the hump of now myself. But Gary had a background in health and fitness, and he was a PT instructor who got wiped out by the crash in '09, and that led him to crypto. And anyway, when all the stuff was going on, I've just interviewed loads of people who are like magnets and hyperbaric oxygen therapy and red light therapy and pulsed electromagnetic field therapy and other kind of technologies that are Rife machines, frequency healing, sound healing, all of this good, really good stuff that's still considered to be fringe, you know, which is crazy because hyperbaric oxygen therapy is 370 years old. Why is it fringe? Well, I know why now, because of the Flexner report and things like that were pushed to one side. And of course, you've got Nikola Tesla inventing the violet ray machine. This machine as well, invented in 1860, which I love, which is basically a wind-up electromagnetic thing where you hold on to these, which puts a small current through your blood and kills parasites and keeps you healthy. But this is quackery, according to the internet. So anyway, throughout the course of my podcast from 2020, 21, 22, I kept meeting people who were talking about the med beds are coming. The med beds are coming. I don't need to go to the doctor because the med beds are going to be here next week. And I'm like, really? Is that really a good strategy? I'm not sure it is. And then another thing in the truth world is the RV, the revaluation of currency. And I kept meeting people. I remember being up on the hill of Tara one day, and I met a woman who said, yeah, I'm setting up healing centers next week. And I was like, oh, really? How are you doing that? And she said, well, we're going to have $1 billion in the bank next week. And I was like, oh, how are you going to do that? So, well, the RV's happening next week. And I'm like, and I just kept seeing these people, manana, manana, manana. It's like a carrot on a stick. And I'm not saying I don't believe that the RV is going to happen or that the medbed technology are real, but they're not here now. And what I kept getting, because I'm claircognizant, so stuff arrives in my head, and I kept getting the same thing. You have everything you need. Just open a healing center now. And what triggered it really was, at the same time, was a guy that I'd become friendly with during the COVID years. He'd had a few of these. And I told him, you need to sort that out. There's protocols for this. You need to sort it out. You're in trouble. And he just kind of laughed at me. And then he dropped dead at 39 years old, 38, 39 years old. And I remember looking at him in the casket going, fuck, this, sorry for swearing, but this, I do swear. This is so preventable. It's so preventable. It's so easily preventable. So I went around to Gary's house, knocked on the door and said, let's set up a healing center. He was like, what should we start with? And I was like, well, I'd interviewed this woman called, I can't remember her name now. This amazing woman, anyway, in the north who'd set up a hyperbaric oxygen chamber place. And I went to interview her for the podcast, and she told me her story about how she completely reversed her own. She was almost crippled, and hyperbaric oxygen, which was expensive and difficult to find in Ireland at the time. There was only, I think, 2 places. She set up the 3rd place and made it much more accessible. And I was like, yeah, well, okay, we should start with that. So we started with hyperbaric oxygen. And then I was having a conversation with Gary about what should we call this place. And we both agreed on Live 5D as a statement. But live5d.com had gone as a domain name. And what I knew instinctivly then is I've been teaching internet marketing for 30 years or 25 years before this. And I knew that we needed a good domain. And because that was gone, we just added the word health onto the end of it. And so it was live5dhealth.com, because a massive part of this, and I've been proven right in the last 3 years, because where are the med beds? Where is the RV? And since then, we've helped thousands of people, avoid hospital. That's what I actually said in an interview with the guards here recently. I said, we're helping people avoid hospital. And they're like, well, that's a matter of opinion. I said, well, no, it isn't actually. I've got to look at this message I got this morning. My wife has avoided hospital. Thank you so much. And Yeah, that's why we called it Live 5D Health, and now it's got all of those things in, and it's got a sauna and a steam room. It's got the best water in Ireland in it. It's got chi energy coming out of the walls, so you're healed just by being in there. And been a massive learning curve, and it's been very exciting and crazy. But yeah, we've created a flagship healing centre now in the west of Ireland, which we're very proud of as a private members association because it's not a commercial venture. It's kind of like a bridge. And funnily enough, I think the idea for it came while I was on the bridge in town over the river. And then when we opened the place, somebody had to point out to me that we were on Bridge Street and there's a bridge out the window by the river. And I've been talking about Dolores Cannon, talking about people in their 50s during this time being bridges. And I realized I was a bridge. I've been going on about bridges for years, and I didn't even realize that, so it was all very divinely inspired and divinely protected. And, it's been an amazing experience. I was just in there this morning giving a 10-minute lecture to a guy in his 30s who's got issues that he shouldn't have. And I said, and I just gave him the whole lecture, clean, structured living water with electrolytes, stop wearing plastic clothing, get some linen on you, start grounding, get some strips, stand on the grass. This simple stuff, cheap, free stuff, and all our machines do is accelerate that detoxification and strengthening of the cells. That's all it is. It's actually simple.
It is, because ultimately it is about our connection with nature and the way in which it has been disrupted, and which we've been, I guess, separated from it bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit over, especially in the last century. And now this century is accelerating it even further. So
Which
what
is
you're
all
doing,
spiritual. Which is all spiritual.
exactly. So that brings me to the question I was going to ask you. What you talked about your journey to health inspiring this marvelous clinic that you have created, you and your partner. What is it? How did you come to the spiritual side of things? So tell us about your spiritual journey. How have you got here?
Well, it started before I was born because when I was young, my first memory. I wrote a book on it. I put all this in a book, which I'm looking for right now, and I can't see it. But I wrote a book with a friend called Abby Wynn, where I described the fact that my first memory is demons trying to recruit me in 1973. Every single night they were there, and they were like, come and work for us, come and be on our side. I'm 3 years old. I remember having these conversations with them. Like, I'm like, go away. I'm not having anything to do with it. And there was a strike in England in 1973 because a satanic overlord called Edward Heath was the prime minister of the UK, who got us into the EU through the back door. Right, that was his task, his role, and he was a terrible, terrible, demonically possessed human being. And he put Britain into this crippling situation called the 3 day week. It became known as the 3 day week when there was no electricity for 4 days a week, I think. And so my mum would come into the room with a little tea light at night to tuck me in, and the light was there, and my bed was in the corner of the room, and I remember sitting up, and there's a shadow on the wall here, but there was also a shadow on the other wall, but it was far more defined, and it looked like me, but it had horns on its head. And I remember doing this, trying to get the horns off my head, and it was copying me. And, that was my first memory. So, and as it turns out, there was an abortion attempt on me while I was in the womb. And I now understand what that was. It was to stop me even being here. And then the recruiting. And then my whole life's been followed by well, I've been attacked basically by Satan my whole life. I feel like I'm old friends with him. That's the truth. And in past life regressions, I go right back, right back. And he's had a good pop at me. And what they do is they whisper in your ear, and you end up drinking, drugs, terrible situations happening, doing stupid things to cause guilt and shame, locking you in. And it's just been a battle against that for years and years and years. And then it all, during COVID, it all made sense because I was getting flashbacks throughout my whole life. I'm still getting them now, which is what we're doing. And then it all makes sense because this is the time of the Eagle and the Condor, which is the Hopi prophecy. So it's not the defeating of the dark, it's the acceptance of the dark, and then and being able to transmute that into where we're going. And that's the short version. I've got much. It's a long story, but in terms of a spiritual journey, I didn't really understand it at all. But I knew what happened in 2020 was going to happen because I'd been my first job was I was a pilot in the RAF, and I got an award at St James's Palace when I was 19. And Prince Philip shook my hand, and he didn't recognise my uniform. And I could not believe that the commandant, can't remember his exact title, but he was made in charge of the RAF in, I think, 1958. And here he was, the boss, the big boss, the Queen's husband, didn't recognise my uniform. And I came away from that day going, what is going on? How does he... And he was horrible to me as well because I was a bit sarcastic to him, and he whipped his hand away and gave me I can still feel his hand, and I can still see the look in his eye. I didn't realise then that he was terrible, terrible, demonically possessed human, or whether he's human or not, I don't know. Just awful, an awful... his crimes are so vast, it's unbelievable. But I didn't know this then, but this is when my wake-up started. And then I got put into loads of weird situations. I was working at the Daily Telegraph as a journalist when Lockerbie happened. And I knew the journalist that flew up to Lockerbie, and I saw all of this. And then and that was next to the office of Max Hastings. And if anybody watching wants to go and research him, you'll see. I've been very close to deep darkness all the way through, because God has put me in all these positions. So I was a conspiracy theorist for years. And it just got deeper and deeper and deeper. And then even like on 9/11, my school friend, Jeff Campbell, was in the towers. And his brother, Matt, is the only one left out of all the families trying to fight for justice for the death of Jeff. And through that process, I realized 9/11 was an inside job. And then, a lot of people did. But, but then I was over Matt's shoulder when he was trying to get into, he was having interviews with MI6, the police, MPs, and all of this, and I saw it just stonewalled all the way. And this led to discovering, I was also a stand-up comic for a while, and there was a comedian called Alan Park who gave me a copy of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in 1999, which I read, and it terrified me, but it accelerated my awareness of all the symbolism everywhere, and the plan for humanity was really dark. And, but then I also grew up in a village called Budbrook in Northamptonshire, where there was a religion started there in the 60s called the Jesus Fellowship. And it was started by a guy called Noel Stanton. Now, Noel Stanton, how do I explain this? I'll give it this way round. The Jesus Fellowship became the Jesus Army, and was closed down, I think, in 2019 because of the sheer volume of cases against it for paedophilia. I know you want to talk about light and stuff, but this is all part of it. And Noel Stanton was a lay preacher in the village church, and he abused my dad when he was a 10-year-old choir boy. And I saw this church grow around me. I mean, one of my poems, I talk about the fact that you're surrounded by pedos, and we are, and worse. When I literally got told by God, my higher self, somebody, start a podcast in 2020, because when it hit, I knew what it was. I knew exactly what it was. And then I was like, right, we need to stop everybody complying with this immediately. And then you go through that whole process of seeing everybody comply. Like, wow. And it was a very lonely path. And I had to make a decision. I knew part of the plan was to put dots on doors of people like me and cart us off. That was part of the New World Order plan. We would have been executed. And I was like, well, I've got to do something because I've got 5 children and I am, what can I do? You know, and I just got told, just talk, just go online and talk. And I was like, what am I going to talk about? And I didn't, and I got told, you actually know quite a lot. So just go and what transpired is that, and I didn't realize this till 22, was that there were hundreds of thousands of people who I'd helped through the darkness of lockdowns and everything by letting them know that they weren't the only ones out there. So I wasn't really about waking people up because I already knew the whole plan. I wasn't discovering the plan like a lot of people were. I already knew what the plan was, but I also had this amazingly strong knowing that it was going to be okay. And it was part of God's plan. And that's why I describe myself as an apocalyptimist, because the apocalypse in Greek just means great unveiling. It doesn't mean the end of the world. I mean, it is an end of one world in a way. And I'm an optimist about the outcome for humanity because God wins.
There is so much in what you have just said, and I am trying to pick a thread. So I think it is very true that I like the way that you brought in the Greek definition of apocalypse, because I feel very much the same, and it is also my feeling that this time feels more intense because because it is a time in which we become aware of how things really have been, but we weren't privy to that. We were under a happy illusion or delusion that the world was one thing, and we have suddenly had the veil stripped away and we see that the world is something else, in all sorts of different ways. And I do believe I am an analytical hypnotherapist, a past life regressionist, and
Oh,
I do know that we are all having to deal with the shadow within. And I think that, you were very conscious of this for a very long time. And that the more that we can understand that there is a shadow within that we need to understand and work with and overcome. There are other ways of expressing that. We might say balance it, we might say integrate it, but the bottom line is that the aim is to be at peace within ourselves. And whatever we do, we need to be at peace within ourselves, because it is only through that that we contribute to the wider light, and that light gets stronger. And in order for that to happen, we have to first acknowledge that it exists, and so that both exist, the shadow and the light, that we have to acknowledge that they both exist. So there is, I feel that that's very, very important. And I'm interested too in what you said about being placed close to darkness,
mm,
because if we take the idea that, or if we work on the principle that we come here on a mission,
mm,
and that some of our missions might be more challenging than others.
hmm
The fact is that when we ignore the call,
yeah,
the things do intensify. We do get placed into situations that say, okay, wake up, wake up.
hmm
Are you awake yet?
hmm
Wake up. And eventually we hopefully get the message before it's too late for us. And
Yeah.
I think that that's, you describe that process really, really well. And you're right, there is no such thing as coincidence. Everything is a meaningful coincidence or a synchronicity, as we might say. But we
Mm.
have to have our eyes open in order to recognize that. So it's really a fascinating thing. Okay, so you talked about past life regressions.
Mm.
That made me curious. Do you, is your understanding that, I guess what I'm curious about is, has there been a process where you start off on one side and you gradually come over to another side? Or is it a case of always being on the side of light and becoming more powerful within it, and then finding that there is a pushback against that light through different lifetimes? Because being a regressionist myself, is I'm fascinated always reading about people's past life experiences, and I have come across instances where people have been involved wittingly and unwittingly in dark magic in past lives, and have found that they are bound, and that the present lifetime is a lifetime in which
Mm.
they understand that they have been bound and they have to find a way of breaking free.
Mm.
So this is, where my mind was when I was listening to you, and I'm just wondering what your journey has been, do you feel?
That's a very good question. Um, well, to answer the first bit, I've always been on the side of light, and that's why they tried to stop me. And as a, normal human being with no memory, really, although I did have memories as a kid, which I now recognize, but at the time I didn't understand. It was just like, for example, people would say to me, do you think you've made it now? Because I was successful in business, for example. And I'd go, no, I haven't even started yet. And that was always my answer. And with the past life stuff, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting stuff. Like Aleister Crowley, for example, has been following me around my whole life. And strangely, the town that I moved into has a castle in the lake just here where Aleister Crowley and W.B. Yeats did black magic 100 years ago as members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And they cast spells on people's family that I know personally, and I've helped lift those spells. And you know, going back in time, I was often murdered for in past lives for fighting the same fight. And I had a reading with an amazing shaman about a month ago, and he's a shapeshifter, and he shows you the thing that's been ailing you, right? So I looked into his eye, and it shifted into this eye that I, strangely, although it was my adversary, it was like looking into the eye of an old friend. So it feels like we've played this game many, many times, and the outcome has not been what we wanted, but this time it will. This time it is. This is why. I always knew as well when I was a little boy. I was like, "This is the last time I'm here." I'd say stuff like that. I'd say, "This is my last trip here," because I've been here, I think, many thousands of times for over many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. That's that's my personal version of my story. People, I can't prove it either way, but that's what all the when you add up all the puzzle pieces over your life, that's the conclusion you can't not you can't avoid, you know, because it all kind of makes sense now. And I think this making sense for a lot of people. I mean, stuff comes out of my mouth. I have no idea what I'm going. I did an event the other week. I was on stage for nearly 8 hours. There was no I had no plan of the running order. We had 17 speakers. I just felt it. And I never know what I'm going to say when I get on stage. I just do it. And when I toured America in 22, I got on stage and I said, COVID was the best thing that ever happened to the human race. It just came out of my mouth. And I expected tomatoes, but everybody cheered, which was amazing. And I realized it hit me that everybody at these events were points of light. And I said, most of you here are points of light that have probably ended up in weird geographical locations over the last 10, 20 years, like me. I mean, this town, why I'm here, is hilarious when I look back on it, because I'm here because I cast a girl in a play 30 years ago in Manchester. That's why I'm in this town. It's really hilarious. There's a series of events that led to me ended up here. And I said, you're all points of light, and you've formed a lattice, and I don't even know where this came from. You formed a lattice across the realm, won't call it a globe, across this realm, and you're holding consciousness and you're holding it as it rises for everybody else. So well done. Give yourself a round of applause. And that's what it is. I mean, that's the way I see it. And I don't really, I don't preach any of this because one of the reasons why my podcast is called Adventures in a Cosmic Suit is because I'm an idiot, the same as everybody else is. And I've made mistakes. And, I've done the booze and the drugs and the stupid shit. And it's okay. We've all, well, not all of us, but a lot of us have done all this. And it's just, you got to forgive yourself and move forward. It's about where we're going from here, not what's behind us. Because those are just, I see all those negative life experiences as like weights around them. We just have to cut them and cut all the cords and integrate and thank the darkness for all these lessons. Because
Yeah.
without the lessons, we wouldn't be evolving. And if you think of this place as a school, wow, it's amazing. I don't know if it is or not, but it feels like it. And I just look at it that way anyway. It's like, well, I've learned this and I've learned this and I've learned this. How do we apply that? And how do we help other people apply that? Because it's all actually very simple, but we overcomplicate it with our minds that have been mainly programmed. But even when because of the way that we're programmed, we overcomplicate everything. It's actually really simple.
It is very simple. I think, you know, there's a sign behind you. We are always free.
It's a statement.
And you talked about, yeah, exactly. It's a real statement, and it is true. Because but the point at which we become free is the point at which we recognize that we are free.
Hmm.
And I think that that is, I think we're all that proverbial canary in the cage with, with the door open and standing there looking, going, oh, do I dare fly out?
Yeah.
And many
Yeah.
don't even realize that the door is open. And
Always
that's
has
the
been.
issue, is that many don't realize.
I have this conversation with my kids every day. I've got two 15-year-old boys, and I'm like, every time I drop them off, I mean, I have five kids, so two of them I managed to get out of school. I mean, I did homeschool them in Morocco for 3.5 years as well. So they've had freedom within education. But as soon as we moved to Ireland, they all went into the school system. I couldn't get them out because I was going through a divorce. But every time I drop them off, I say three things to them. Have a nice day in prison. Remember everything they're teaching you is bullshit and you're going to have to relearn it. And question everything, including this. And it's rubbed off on most of them. But the two lads, every day they moan about going to school. I say, you don't have to go. You can opt out of this anytime you want. In fact, I want you to opt out. But they choose to do it because they want to be with their friends. And it's like, well, so what can I do? I've got to respect them because obviously maybe going to this indoctrination camp they call school is going to be a lesson for them, on their own personal spiritual journey. But at least they know their dad's got their back if they decide to leave. Yeah, the cage door has always been open.
The cage door is always open, and we have to have the courage to fly out once we realize that it is indeed open.
That's why that says we
I
are
think
always free instead of we will be.
that's right. That's right. We are, and that's really important. And I think too that, the other thing you said was about forgiveness and acceptance. I think that is a huge part of it because I feel very strongly that the most corrosive emotion around is shame.
Yeah.
And because when people feel shame, then it gets into self loathing. And when we get into self loathing, we are separating ourselves from our own light and, of course, from the light of creation. And therein, we become trapped in darkness. And we do forget that we are always free. So it's very important that we find a way to come to that point of acceptance, because that's the piece that I was referring to before, is acceptance that the world is not perfect, acceptance that light and dark exist, acceptance that it's not ideal. And I think for many people, the realization that life is not ideal, that the world is less than ideal, it brings in, it's not just fear, it's grief for discovering that things are not as they were. And I think this is the story of the fall from paradise is about that grief as well, of realizing that things are not as they should be. And so it's very powerful to listen to the way in which you have had to wrestle and come to terms with, and very powerfully let go of that and step into yourself. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I asked this question of someone recently on this channel because she is a reverend, not of a conventional religion. And the question I asked her, and I will ask you as well, because although you're not setting yourself up as being a leader in that sense, people do look. And so the question is this: how do you ensure that your ego is kept to a manageable size so that you are able to hold your integrity?
That's a good question. I've been through a lot of ego deaths with plant medicine that have helped me enormously at the right time. It was ayahuasca that taught me about forgiveness, and it was magic mushrooms that created take you to a dimensions that make you realize that, everything's connected and we're all one. I don't want to be a leader in any way. I'm just, there was just nobody else around to do it was like, you, I made that decision 5 years ago when I was like, okay, it was a very real thing back in 2020 that we could just get carted off and taken to. I mean, Obama had built up the FEMA camps, ordered 100,000 electric guillotines in America. That these camps were being built everywhere for dissidents like me, and I knew, and I was like, am I willing to die for this or not? And that was the question I asked myself, and the answer was always yes, because I know that we're eternal spirits, and it doesn't matter. So you've got to do what's right. It's just a very, very simple choose between right and wrong. And what I've learned since then is that to try to apply some of that to myself as well, because I'm very good at helping people, really good at helping people, but I'm a flawed human being. And I keep telling people I am a flawed human being. And like I said, I'm an idiot just like the rest of us. And, but it's okay. And my ego, I did have a bit of trouble with it in 22 when I went on this tour in America, and I was idolized. And I remember on the second date there was a in Washington, Olympia, Washington State. There was a lovely woman who was crying her eyes out in front of me, saying, "I can't believe you're here." And I was like, "I'm just Mark. Why are you crying?" And she brought me to tears, and I had to go and sit by a tree and go, what the hell? I had no idea, literally no idea, the effect that my podcast was having on people. And yeah, there was a bit of a time then when it was like, it was like being famous, but it was because, and I'd been through this before, you see, because I'd done a couple of TV shows in the 90s, and I was on the verge of being potentially very famous, but I got, again, it was another lesson from God. I got pulled back from that because my ego was out of check. And also when I was in the Air Force, I mean, I explained this to my kids. I'm like, I mean, I was flying solo when I was 16 years old. I could fly before I could drive. By the time I left the Air Force and I was at university and I was getting involved in comedy in Manchester, there was a time when there was a couple of incidences where there was a guy who said, well, we didn't want to work with you because you were too arrogant. And there was a girlfriend's dad who said, you're very arrogant. And I was, because I could do anything, and I knew that you could do anything. I'm a council house kid who became an Air Force pilot. So I was good. And then I turned my attention to whatever I did, I was good at it. So there was definitely a process I had to go through. But, it ended up with, in 2017, 2018, I was suicidal for the first time in my life. And I've lost a lot of friends to suicide, and I'd always been a bit dismissive about them. Like, what a waste of life. Why did they do it? Selfish, blah, blah, blah. But I now understand what that was. And I had to go through that process. And I got, earlier on when you were talking, I was thinking about how God puts you in these positions, and I described it like being slapped round the face with a big wet fish by God until, do you now understand, you fucking idiot? And when I was at my lowest, long dark night of the soul, and I was literally on the edge, I couldn't think of, it was Groundhog Day. All I remember is getting up, I'm in the shower again, and then I'm getting up, I'm in the shower again, and it's a terrible, terrible place to be. Completely desolate, no hope, awful, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I try my, I don't know if try is the right word. I don't have any ego about any of this. I just know that over time I've proven that I can get off my arse and show everybody it's going to be okay. And if I'm wrong, we're all dead anyway. And what do you care about that for anyway? You're an eternal spirit. So it's kind of like that. It's more a case of, I don't want to lead anybody. I just want to say, look, you can do this. Everybody can do this. Everybody can say no to fake authority, stand in their power, sort their alignment out. And there's very simple things that you can do to do that. And the Healing Center is a big part of this, because I got the download a while ago that part of the parasite problem is technology. I believe it's a technology. So the parasites are put into us for the demonic realm, controlled by ancient AI, to latch onto us and feed off us and keep us in a state of perpetual fear and shame in order to feed the loose, for the loose, not let alone the other thing they do, which is physically much worse for the little people. Which is actually the thing that gets me out of bed every day, because people don't realize how bad that is. But the it's YouTube, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail. But that, all the stuff in the Healing Center is really about cleansing the cells, because nobody's sick, they're toxic. Disease doesn't exist, it's just dis-ease. So if we can get rid of the parasites and we can strengthen the cells and look at the cell like a battery that needs to be charged up and needs to be cleansed and nourished and activate the mitochondria and do all of these things, then we are opening ourselves up to source with a much clearer channel. And when that happens, that's assisting with the rising of consciousness, because we're they've spent so much time and money to calcify our pineal glands. In fact, episode 2 of my podcast was me on a beach down in Kerry, I think, talking about the pineal, because I knew about the pineal gland a long time ago. And I said, this is what it is. The key to this is cleaning. That was episode 2 in 2020. Clean, detoxify, decalcify your pineal gland, because that's the key. That's what it's all about, cutting you off from source, God, whatever term people want to use. And I don't even remember the question now.
No, that's great. Well, I've got another one for you
Go on.
because you talked about times in your life in which you were arrogant, or you were told that you were arrogant. But
Confident. I was
I
confident.
sometimes exactly what I was going to say. There is a fine line between confidence and arrogance.
Look, I'm an
So
18-year-old and I'm doing aerobatic displays in an aeroplane. 18. I look at my 19-year-old daughter now and I'm like, geez, I was doing aerobatic displays when I was a year younger than you, and you're a child. Of course I was confident.
exactly. And I think that this is, I say to my clients when they're confident, when they're afraid, because they've been taught that being confident is arrogance.
Yeah.
And so they become afraid of shining. And I
Yeah.
always, well, you know, if people don't like the fact that you're shining, they can go and get a pair of sunglasses. I think,
That's a very nice way of putting it. I'd have to put it in a slightly ruder way than that. Yeah.
I think it's really important because we have to be free to shine.
Hmm.
Where and for me, you may have a different view on this, and I'm very interested in hearing it. But where is that defining line where confidence becomes arrogance? And I think where it becomes arrogance is when we lose sight of other people, and because we're so involved, and we forget to temper ourselves with compassion. I think where compassion and empathy begin to disappear because we're too busy proving how wonderful we are, that's where I would say we're straying into arrogance.
Yeah, well, I never think that I'm wonderful. I just get on with what I'm doing, and everything that I do is based around taking care of other people. Always has been. I mean, when I ran a really successful business in the UK, I had an investor who was constantly telling me off for buying plants so that there was oxygen in the office, for getting a trampoline so that people could move around during the day, for buying a juicer so people could have fresh juice instead of Coca-Colas during it. And he was like, he couldn't believe that I was doing this stuff. He said, "What are you doing it for?" I said, "Because when we've got happy people, happy, healthy people, surely that's a good thing." And he couldn't understand it. And I've always been massively empathic. I want to save everybody, but I've had to learn you can't save everybody because they've got to do the work themselves. That's been really hard for me to deal with because I'm like, build the healing center. I'm like, then it'll be packed. They all realize that we can heal. No, no, it
And
doesn't.
now,
It doesn't work like that.
yeah, I think that's
And it's funny that because because the demons or the AI or whatever know this about you. So early on in my podcast, I would get comments like, "Oh, who do you think you are?" Or who do who do you think you are to tell anybody anything? And it would affect me. And then I realized it was just them. They know how to press that button, and I was like, I'm just not paying any attention to it anymore. And I think what's happened is I don't care. There's an amazing. I care about the human race, and I care about our future, and I care about children and my children especially. But I don't care what anybody says anymore because I know when I look myself in the eye, I'm doing the right thing to the best of my ability every single day. And if you don't like that, then you know where the door is.
exactly. So I think that it's wonderful to see your light shining. And I am deeply grateful for the time that you've given because I know how you are, how busy you are. And so I thank you for your time. and for the wonderful reminder that we are always free. So, Mark, thank you.
Well, actually, no, there's something I want to finish with because, sorry to interrupt you, but you reminded me of something earlier, and I wanted to tell you this. So I always write poems in times of darkness, right? I'm great at funerals, not so good at weddings, right? And and I wrote this poem when I was 19 years old because I set a thing up called the Live Poet Society, and we had loads of people, and we published a book and did tours, and a few of them became famous. And there was a very short poem I wrote because I'd been inspired by Roger McGough and his short poems back then. Not so sure about him now, but anyway, I wrote this very, very short poem, and it goes like this: There is nothing so perfect as imperfection. And that was it. Once you get that, you're fine. You're good to go.
I love that because something many of my clients often hear me say is perfection is highly overrated.
There
So,
you go. We're on the same team.
absolutely, we are. So, thank you very much. Now, if people want to find you and your clinic, how do they do that?
We're in Boyle in the west of Ireland, and the website is live5d, number 5d, health.com. My website is themarkatwoodshow.com, and my Substack is diaryofaconspiracytheorist.substack.com. And my busiest place is X, which is x.com/Mark Atwood.
Perfect. I'll be sure to put those links in the description box.
Well,
Mark,
I'll post this as well and put your links. So send me those. So
I absolutely will. Thank you very much for your
great
time.
to meet you.
And thank you all for watching. In the description box, you will also find links to my own websites as well as my Substack. Until next time, goodbye.
See ya.